You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, how did the Spurs fare in their last three games? Reinforcements are starting to arrive with De'Aaron Fox, Jeremy Sochan, and more players returning from the injured list. The Spurs through 9 games of the season. Welcome back to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. My last episode did come out on Tuesday this past week, but Spurs have played 3 games that I want to jump right into. So let's dive into how did the Spurs fare this past week in these last 3 games for San Antonio. So let's go back to Wednesday. The Spurs are on the road in Los Angeles to play the Lakers. The Spurs were favored by 1.5, with the Lakers only having Luka Doncic among their 3 stars available because Austin Reeves and LeBron James were both injured and out for this game. The Lakers did win this game by 2 in crunch time. The Spurs did build a 12-point lead in the second half, but they couldn't hold on to it. The Lakers made enough plays in crunch time, though it was a wild finish with the Spurs almost forcing overtime with Los Angeles, where Marcus Smart had an inbound turnover, trying to kind of rush the ball and trying to kill the clock. So then eventually Julian Champagnie goes up for an alley-oop kind of play, and he ends up getting fouled. So Champagnie has a chance to tie the game by making 2 free throws. He missed the first free throw, which means that now he has to intentionally miss the second one. And on that second one, Keldon Johnson almost got a tip-in layup on Champagnie's miss that would have sent the game to overtime, but Keldon's tip-in did not go in, so the Lakers ended up holding on there by 2 points, even though, again, Los Angeles should have basically won. They were about 4 with less than 30 seconds left, and I thought that they had the game wrapped up, but the Spurs kept coming back, but then also the Lakers kept making mistakes there. Wemby was in foul trouble for this game, and he did foul out in the fourth quarter, the second or third time this season that has happened. One thing that I noted in my write-up after the game was that he was having some trouble in some of these games with his offensive fouls, which were really compiling. So he had 3 offensive fouls out of his 6 fouls in that game. The Spurs had some difficulty with their turnover issues on that night. And then on defense, Luka Doncic, of course, he can get to the foul line, consistently. So he ends up with 35 points on the night, ends up making 13 free throws, which that was a big issue for the Spurs, was keeping the Lakers off the free throw line, where they made a season-high opponent 34 makes. The Lakers did. The Lakers were also impactful on the offensive glass, and they ended up tallying a season-high for an opponent, 28 second chance points against the Spurs' defense. Jeremy Sochan, Kelly Olynyk, and Lindy Waters III all made their return to the lineup in this game. This game was also the game where Wemby talked about how the game's really sped up for him on offense when teams are kind of sending those double teams his way. And so that's kind of where Victor kind of just expressed how he's kind of feeling out there on the court with how teams have been doubling him, sending some trapping action, having multiple defenders near him, like in zones. Really beginning with that Miami game where we really saw it taking place, as I talked about in the last episode, against Phoenix, and the Lakers employed some of those strategies, having a smaller wing defender on him, and then and then just having help around him at all times. Let's see here. Yeah, and then I did do a big breakdown of the film on that game of how the Lakers were defending Wemby over on the spotupshot.com if you want to check that out. So again, the first game this week ends up with the loss to the Lakers in Los Angeles, but again, barely by 2 points. Now let's move to Friday. The Spurs are at home hosting the Houston Rockets for the first time this season. This was a big game because it was the Spurs' first NBA Cup game of the season, a group play game. So the Rockets were favored by 4.5, and the Spurs ended up winning here in crunch time by 11 points. The Spurs did lead by 12 in the second half, but and then the Rockets got it down to crunch time, and San Antonio made enough plays in crunch time to defeat the Rockets. So by winning this first NBA Cup game, the Spurs start off in their Cup schedule 1-0, and this is a very stacked Cup group that they're in. They have not only the Rockets, they have the Golden State Warriors in this group. They have the Portland Trailblazers who have been playing pretty well out west this year, and also the Denver Nuggets. So again, it's a very stacked group that the Spurs are in for their NBA Cup group phase play right now. One of the reasons why the Spurs won this game was because of their very aggressive, their aggression on the defensive end. How teams have been guarding them with basically sending doubles and traps toward Wemby. The Spurs kind of employed a little bit of that against Kevin Durant on this night. So one thing the Spurs did very well was hound the Rockets as ball handlers. Bringing the ball up the court, trying to get into their actions. They made it very difficult. Harrison Barnes gets a lot of credit for really making Durant kind of having to fight for position. And then of course the Spurs sent that trapping action near Durant at half court. Durant post game said he didn't expect the Spurs to do that, to really trap him that aggressively, and so he did end up with 8 turnovers on the night. Stephon Castle has to be mentioned here for his on-ball pressure in that game against the Rockets, really making it tough for their ball handlers to bring the ball up the floor. Wemby was ready. The Spurs and Wemby were more ready for those double teaming actions that Houston was going to employ because they were taking some elements of what the Lakers and Suns had done by basically having a smaller guard on Wemby. They had Josh Okogie on him and Tari Eason for most of the game, And then, of course, they had help nearby, either by employing their zone defense with multiple bigs like Steven Adams, Alperen Şengün, or Clint Capella. And so the Spurs were a lot more prepared for this kind of attack because they knew how teams have been guarding Wemby. So Wemby was starting to move the ball around, and maybe he wouldn't get the lead assist, but somebody else would kick to the next player over who's going to be open from three, and that player would make the shot. So and it also helped that the Spurs just shot better from three in this game as well. So again, one thing else that I also wanted to mention about Wemby is that in the second half, we really saw how the Spurs had him catching more at the nail and then kind of operating from there, where he could kind of read where these double teams and triple teams at times or traps were coming, and he could either find cutters. There was a nice play where you find Stephon Castle in the fourth for a cut and a dunk, or kind of moving the ball around where his next teammate swings the ball to an open three-point shooter. And so the Spurs did get inside the paint for the second half a lot more. I also want to note something that Wemby said, is that he said that, he was asked, what allowed you to kind of get going in the paint in the second half. And he says that basically he kind of saw that the Rockets were adding more offensive oriented players, where, the more of those players that were on the floor, their skills are on the offensive end, not necessarily on the defensive end. So he knew that he had a better chance of attacking them even when they did double, or kind of opening up things for his teammates. And so that was just something that Victor mentioned out there. The Spurs, like I said, were ready from three. They had a good shooting night from outside with some of their key shooters. Harrison Barnes ends up with 24 points, makes several threes. Julian Champagnie ends up with 22 points in the night, makes multiple threes. And also Devin Vassell, 15 points on the night, made a few threes as well. Something Champagnie talked about, which was really interesting, was that he was asked, where were you standing basically out of the floor? Like, what were you trying to do to kind of stay effective in this game, spreading the floor for Wemby? He basically said that with the Rockets trying to go to this zone look, he wanted to basically be on one of the sides, one of the corners where maybe one of the bigs was, because those bigs were going to be their job out there was to play that zone and also be ready to double on Wemby or triple team Wemby and really help out inside. And so if the Spurs kicked the ball around, swung it around, Julian was going to get himself a nice shot there in the corner, and sure enough he did, and he made a few of them, like I said. So it was just interesting to hear Champagnie's mindset, kind of explaining where he's kind of picking his spots on the floor, trying to read where the swings would come whenever teams did start to double Wemby, where he thought he would get a pretty good shot, and sure enough that worked out for him, getting some of those corner looks in this game. The Spurs also did a great job of crashing the offensive glass in this game, and also Stephon Castle has to be mentioned for his passing in this game with the season high 13 assists but 5 turnovers, although I'm going to talk about how Castle cleaned that issue up in the next game. So again, the Spurs got a big win. They got an upset over the Rockets, winning that game by 11 points in crunch time. Now let's move on to the most recent game. That was on Saturday. The Spurs are at home again on the second night of a back-to-back, hosting the New Orleans Pelicans. This is their second game now against the Pellies this season. So the Spurs did they were favored by 11.5 because, if you look at the Pelicans' record, they've really been struggling. They were without multiple key players like Zion Williamson, Jordan Poole, DeJounte Murray. And the Spurs did win by 7, but New Orleans really made them fight for this win. They really had to earn it. So in the second quarter, it looked like the game was going to get away from the Pelicans. The Spurs went on a 20-2 run led by De'Aaron Fox, who made his return to the court in this game. They ended up leading by as many as 19 points, San Antonio. During this run, or during the second quarter, Fox was quite efficient here. He ends up with 15 points in just 3.5 minutes of play in the second quarter on a perfect shooting, 6 of 6 from the floor. Overall in the game, he ends up with 24 points in his first game back. A very efficient shooting night, as I displayed on his shot chart after the game. And so you have to give the Pels credit, like I mentioned. They just kept fighting back. The Spurs would go up by like 12, 15 points, and then here come the Pelicans again, and they'd get it down to like 8, 9 points, and they just kind of kept the game close every time the Spurs would kind of get a double-digit lead, and then eventually that did lead to a 3-point game with less than 30 seconds left in this game where New Orleans had a chance here. Trey Murphy III had a very good game for New Orleans, matching his career high for the third time of 41 points. And then rookies Jeremiah Fears and Derek Queen really stood out to me. They didn't maybe have the most efficient night, but they were willing to go inside, attack the Spurs' defense, making some plays out of double teams. I just wanted to kind of credit there that the rookies, they've looked impressive for New Orleans in the 2 games I've seen them play against San Antonio. Let's see. Yeah, I talked about how that went down. So then the game does go down to crunch time, and now De'Aaron Fox comes through for the Spurs, and again, just his first game back, where he gets possession of the ball. He kind of gets by Fears, stops his dribble, uses like a step through, and makes an 11-foot floater to give the Spurs a 5-point lead when the Spurs were only up by 3. Then the next play, the Pelicans try a desperate 3, they miss it, and then Fox gets fouled by the Pels, and then he goes down and makes the 2 clutch free throws to basically get the game to 7, and the Spurs ended up winning by 7. So again, Fox was very impactful in his first game back. He was asked, whether he was rusty. He said, yeah, he said, even though, the numbers looked really good for him, he said, he did feel kind of rusty out there after not playing since March. And then also one thing about him that he said he wanted to do was kind of just set the tone on defense first, and with his rebounding, he was basically trying to figure out, how to mix in with the team right now, because he said that he didn't really want to disrupt their chemistry. He knew that they were 6-2 without him, and so he really didn't want to, come in too aggressive in terms of like, just not messing with the chemistry too much in his first game back. And so we saw that he kind of picked his spots there of being more aggressive in the second quarter and the fourth quarter. One thing he also mentioned that was very interesting was that, he said at times he might have looked more like he was off ball or like playing, maybe not as aggressive. And the reason for that is because he says that he knows that every night he's going to get the best perimeter defender from the opposite team. So on this night, Herb Jones, a very standout defender in the NBA, was the player guarding Fox. So Fox almost like kind of told his teammates, you guys go work 4-on-4. Basically, let me take out this really good defender, Herb Jones. And he said, why am I going to bring Jones into the offense and really, bring in his impactfulness there when the Spurs have multiple players who can beat players at one-on-one, like Stephon Castle, like Victor Wembanyama, etc. So that was just interesting to see hear from Fox how he's kind of reading the floor. And then Stephon Castle also talked about how there's going to be opportunity for other players because Fox is getting the best perimeter defender from the other teams every night that he's out there on the floor. As far as Fox coming through in crunch time, he said that he told Victor that this is the reason why the Spurs brought me here, is to help you out, try to close games here, help you and the Spurs out. And so sure enough, he did that, coming through in those final two offensive possessions for San Antonio. On the offensive end, the Spurs had a very good night. They scored a season high 126 points. They multiple players shared the scoring load, where 8 players out of the 10 that participated in the game ended up with double figures scoring nights for the team. One area where they really hurt the Pelicans was in the paint with 62 paint points. The Spurs made a season high 72% paint accuracy. And so some of the players who really were impactful in the paint were Wemby, kind of got going there in the paint on multiple alley-oop dunks and finishes on rolls. De'Aaron Fox, got into that floater range area with his paint jumpers. Keldon Johnson crashing the offensive glass for putbacks. Stephon Castle was able to get some of his drives and also went to that short paint jumper. And then Jeremy Sochan was found several times on the pick and roll by Stephon Castle, and he finished multiple plays there at the rim. Castle had another good passing night, ending up with 14 assists and a new season high just a day after tallying 13 against the Rockets. And what's notable about his 14 assists is that he only had 2 turnovers, and none of those turnovers were bad pass turnovers, because as I've written before, one of his issues this season with compounding those turnovers has been that he has a lot of those bad pass kind of turnovers. And so, it helps that he has another lead guard now out there with him in De'Aaron Fox. So Castle doesn't, have to focus on always driving in and kind of creating for himself or others. Now he has a partner there in the backcourt to do that, similar to how Dylan Harper was there to help him out before he got injured. And then also Coach Mitch Johnson had said Castle's decision making has been a lot better with his turnovers, in terms of, he says that he's basically hitting singles. He's not trying to make those really difficult passes maybe across the other side of the court. He's really just looking for the next pass coming up, and he's making that pass there. And so we saw that Victor Wembanyama finished 3 alley-oop dunks in this game. That matched his season high of 3 alley-oop dunks, and all 3 of those passes were fed or sent by Stephon Castle. Also, you saw the good pick and roll chemistry between both Castle and Jeremy Sochan. So again, I think having Fox back is really going to help Castle with that turnover issue that he's had for most of the season so far. And then also off the bench, as far as shooting the ball from 3, the Spurs got some good shooting nights from all their 3 shooters that they're going to be depending on this season from outside, which are Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, and Julian Champagnie, especially when the Pels were trying to double Wemby by having either rookie Micah Peavy guarding him or Sadiq Bey, again, wing and guard players guarding him. So overall, this past week, Vegas said the Spurs should have gone 2-1, and they did just that. They went 2-1. Now, the only thing is that they defeated the Lakers. They lost to the Lakers, who they were supposed to beat, and then they defeated the Rockets, who San Antonio was supposed to lose to. So again, they kind of did what they were supposed to do this past week by going 2-1, and now they are on consecutive wins at the end of this week. All right, now for our second topic, let's talk about reinforcements starting to arrive for the Spurs. So as I mentioned, De'Aaron Fox made his first comeback here of the season, playing in his first game against the Pelicans. Also, since Wednesday against the Lakers, we've seen Jeremy Sochan, Kelly Olynyk, and Lindy Waters III all playing games since that game against the Lakers. Sochan and Olynyk, every time the team has been issuing injury reports, they've been listed as questionable because the team is kind of monitoring their return from injury. So far, I haven't got the injury Sunday as of the injury report as of 3:53 p.m. on Sunday Mountain Time before the Bulls game. So we'll see what their status is for that Monday game against Chicago. Lindy Waters III is no longer on their injury report. And as far as minutes, Sochan is, of course, a key part of the rotation. So he's getting consistent minutes off the bench, playing some small ball five, also playing in lineups next to Victor. And then Olynyk has had some spot minutes. He didn't play in that game against New Orleans. And then Lindy Waters as well has had some spot minutes in each game since he's been back, though he hasn't played like in every quarter of the games. And then we did see that, Coach Johnson, he had Jordan McLaughlin play a lot of minutes in that, not a lot of minutes, but, decent minutes in that game against the Rockets. But then McLaughlin got a DNP against the Pelicans, and also Olynyk got a DNP against the Pelicans. And also, since Sochan has returned and all these players, there's been no more minutes there for Bismack Biyombo. Now, some good news for the Spurs in the injury department, as well as having those other players already return, is that Luke Kornet should be making his return soon on Saturday before the Pelicans game. Kornet was actually listed as questionable, so that's a very good sign that he's on his way back soon. But then the team did rule him out eventually when their final injury report came out. So I am, like I said, it's 3:54 p.m. Mountain Time on Sunday. I'm waiting for the Spurs to issue their injury report against the Bulls on Monday. So there's a chance either Kornet's listed as questionable again, or maybe he's even listed as available to play. So again, we'll kind of wait and see, but we do know that Kornet is going to be on his way soon to the team. And then Dylan Harper is still out though with that left calf strain. And again, I haven't got the injury report yet on Sunday, so I don't know what his status is for the Chicago game. So again, we're kind of waiting to see what's going on with Dylan Harper when he eventually returns. Now that we know that Kornet is definitely going to be on his way back pretty soon, again, I don't know if it's Monday in Chicago or later on this week against their game on Wednesday or Friday, the Spurs, or whatever game this week. I do want to mention something about just how their defense has really struggled with Wemby off the floor. And so again, these are some very early numbers from cleaningtheglass.com. So let me go through these numbers here, just because it's going to paint the picture of how much their defense should improve when Wemby's off the floor once Kornet gets back. So with Wemby on the floor this season in 628 possessions, the Spurs are holding teams to 103.6 points per 100, which is in the 97th percentile elite defense. Of course, we knew that. We know that when Victor's on the floor, the Spurs are awesome defensively. They're a top 5 defense. That number, 103.6, would be better than the number 1 defense in the league right now, which is the Oklahoma City Thunder at 106.4 points per 100. So again, we know that's the easy one. That matches the eye test. We know that the Spurs are awesome when Victor's on the court. Here's what happens, though, this season so far through 9 games when Victor's off the floor. In 243 possessions without Victor, the Spurs are allowing 133.1 points per 100, 0 percentile, just, basically absolute, terrible, bad, horrible, just, whatever word you want to come up with there. So yeah, just awful. I mean, that number 133.1 is worse than the 30th ranked defense of the Brooklyn Nets, who allow 127.3 points per 100 per game. So again, just really bad defense without Victor. Now, here's why I'm talking about how impactful it's going to be to have Kornet pretty soon back on the court. So with Kornet, and again, I do want to caution that it's a very small sample size because we only saw Luke play in a handful of games before he got injured with his injury. So with Kornet and no Wemby so far this season in 71 possessions, again, a very small sample size, the Spurs are holding teams to 101.4 points per 100, 98th percentile. So again, also elite defense having Luke there, but without Victor. Now, when there's no Kornet or no Wemby, which has basically been the case these last several games since Kornet went out, the Spurs are allowing 146.1 points per 100 on defense, and that's a pretty good sample size of 172 possessions. And this is something you've seen, if you've been watching the Spurs games, where initially before Sochan got back and Olynyk, the Spurs had Bismack Biyombo out there. It wasn't working out with Biyombo, so then Coach Johnson was trying to find any way to kind of save the defense, and so he was having to go with at times Harrison Barnes at the 5, Keldon Johnson at the 5, Stephon Castle not Stephon Castle, rookie Carter Bryant at center at times. So again, the Spurs are just trying to find any way to kind of hold down the fort while Wemby was out. And of course, it wasn't working, painted by those numbers. Again, 146.1 points per 100, 20 points per 100 worse than Brooklyn. And then since Kelly Olynyk got back, he started playing a little bit of backup 5, and that didn't work out as well. And then now Jeremy Sochan has been playing the small ball 5 for the Spurs in those most recent games against the Rockets and against New Orleans. So again, I think that once Olynyk gets back, again, it was a small sample size, but the Spurs were showing in those first few games with him that they can hold down the fort while Wemby's out. They're at a very good level, and so I think again he should help with the defense when Wemby's off the floor, as well as which that's going to help as well as holding some of those leads when Luke eventually gets back. Let's keep going. All right, now for our third topic, let's just kind of go through where the Spurs are at through 9 games of the season. I'm not going to go too deep into the team. I will be doing that in a deep dive on Tuesday after they've already played their 10th game of the season. But let's just go through 9 games where they're at as of Sunday when I collected this data at 2:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So the Spurs have the number 7 offense in the league, scoring 118.1 points per 100. They have the number 6 defense, holding teams to 110.8 points per 100, and they have the 4th best net rating at a plus 7.3 points per 100. Looking at some of their records, they are 7-2 overall as of Sunday, tied with the Denver Nuggets for second out west. They are undefeated at home, 5-0 for the first time since the 2015-2016 season. They are 2-2 on the road. They're pretty much taking care of business right now. They have a good record as favorites. They're 5-2 as favorites. They're also 2-0 as underdogs. So they won both of those games where they've been underdogs. And then, just looking at some of the competition they've played, they are 3-2 against the teams that are 500 and above, and they're also undefeated 4-0 against below 500 teams. Of the 12 teams as of Sunday with a record of 600 or better, the Spurs have only played 3 of those teams, and so they are 2-1 against those 3 teams, which are the Houston Rockets and the Miami Heat, and then of course the Spurs did lose to the Lakers. So again, that's just a quick update on where the Spurs are at through 9 games. And again, I will be writing a big in-depth review of the Spurs through 10 games once they play that game on Monday in Chicago. I should have that piece going up on Tuesday, and in there I'll kind of go into more of the numbers on each end of the floor and kind of look at the players and et cetera, and all that kind of analysis. All right, let's move on to news and notes. So the big news this past week in the city of San Antonio was that on Tuesday, San Antonio voters went to the polls. They voted, and so the Spurs' arena did pass that election. It passed 52-48 by 4 points, according to the San Antonio Express News, where I got the data. And so the Spurs will be getting their new arena soon, or not soon. It's going to take a while to get there, but it's projected to be built and ready by the year 2030. I mean, by the 2032 season, 2032-2033 season. So basically by that time in 32-33 season, Wemby will be in the prime of his career at about age 28 or 29 by then. And also that means the same thing for both Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper. Again, should be all 3 of those players should be in the prime of their careers when that new arena is ready to go for the Spurs. Make sure to check out the spotupshot.com. So I'm providing my notes and observations after every game. I've also been adding these new player ratings to each game if you've been checking them out for both the Spurs and the team that they're playing on that night. And that's a metric I'm using called the game score metric from pivotfade.com. So again, I think it's been kind of cool of a cool way to kind of check where each player's night ends, and then also kind of give some thoughts on some of the players from both teams in those write-ups. I've been also creating some film breakdowns after the Spurs have an off day the next night after a game. And then, of course, like I mentioned, I have my 10-game review coming up soon after the Spurs play the Bulls on Monday. So that should be coming up here on the spotupshot.com on Tuesday. All right, now let's look at the Spurs' schedule coming up for this week until my next episode. So on Monday, they are in Chicago on the road against the Bulls. The Bulls have been off to a good start out east. They are 6-3 right now as of Sunday, 5th out east. They're about league average on both ends of the floor according to their metrics. I know that Josh Giddey is questionable with a right ankle sprain to play, and also Patrick Williams is probable. And then they are going to be without former Spurs Zach Collins and Kobe White. So again, the big player to watch here is Giddey. He's been having a really good season for Chicago, kind of leading the charge there. But we'll see if he's going to play or not. Again, the Spurs are on the road to Chicago on Monday. Then on Wednesday, the Spurs are back home. They're hosting the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors are 5-5 right now, 8th out west. They're slightly below league average on both ends of the floor. Stephen Curry has been out for the Warriors this past week due to an illness, but his status is questionable for Sunday against the Pacers. So maybe by the middle of the week, by Wednesday, and then Friday when the Spurs play the Warriors, Curry will be back in full form against the Spurs. We'll see. And then of course on Friday, the Spurs again are playing the Warriors at home in San Antonio, but this is a very important game for the NBA Cup, because that is a NBA Cup game for San Antonio. Again, we'll check. The big news will be what is the status of Curry for these games, and then on Sunday the Spurs are still at home because they're going to be on a homestand during these next few weeks. The Spurs are hosting the Sacramento Kings, who are having a tough season to start. They are 3-6 out west. Overall. 3-6 overall, 11th out west. And so they're basically, their metrics, they're a bottom 10 team on both ends of the floor right now. They have been missing Domantas Sabonis for a few games, for 3 games this season, but he is questionable to possibly make his return soon on their latest injury report. So again, so maybe Sabonis is back by Sunday when the Spurs play the Kings. So again, this week looks like a very favorable week for the Spurs, considering that they might meet the Bulls without Giddey. They might meet the Warriors with either with Curry, or maybe Curry's barely getting back to trying to get back to 100%. And the same thing where Sabonis is not in full form if he plays on Sunday. So the Spurs, they should go either 4-0 this week, maybe 3-1. I could see they shouldn't. I don't see why they should go 2-2 or 1-3 or 0-4. So again, I think that this week, it should be, by the time I do my next episode, it should be like a 3-1 week or maybe 4-0 week. I don't know. At worst a 2-2 week, I guess 500, but they shouldn't go 1-3 or 0-4. If not, they really had some letdowns, because I think in a lot of these games, San Antonio might be favored considering their record and just all the metrics where they're at right now. So and the fact that most of these games, aside from the Chicago game, are at home. So again, I'll be recording my next episode next week on a Monday. So look for the next episode of the Spot Up Pod on next Monday. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.